I guess we'll have an entirely new definition of lemon laws now. Don Lemon, that is, Mr. Lemon, has been indicted by a federal grand jury for his antics at a Christian church in St. Paul, Minnesota. So let's go to law school together for a moment and examine the charges and the likelihood of conviction. He got charged under 18 U.S.C. 241 and 18 U.S.C. 248. These statutes are rooted in attempts to stop violent interference with civil liberties, including religious freedom. Here's what prosecutors need to prove to make this stick. First, they have to show that there is a conspiracy to injure civil rights. That means showing a meeting of the minds to injure, oppress, threaten, or intimidate worshipers regarding their right to worship. It's not enough to be at the scene. The government must show coordinated action beyond just holding a camera. Here, prosecutors will definitely subpoena Don Lemon's texts, emails, phone calls, and other communications to assess his level of involvement in planning this event and his knowledge that it may involve disruption of worship. This video doesn't look good for Lemon. He just doesn't look like a guy holding a camera. He seems to be a fairly active participant with foreknowledge of exactly what was going to happen.
These are resistance protesters. They're planning an operation that we're going to follow them on. I can't tell you exactly what they're doing, but it's called Operation Pull Up, and it's Takima Armstrong, and she has been doing this since George Floyd, Dante Wright, and others, where they surprise people, catch them off guard, and hold them to account. And so that's what we're doing here. And then after we do this operation, you'll see it live. And these operations are surprise operations. Again, I can't tell you where they're going.
You'll see it live, almost as if it was scripted. There's a second charge, interfering with religious freedom under the Freedom of Access to Clinics Entrances Act. That's 18 U.S.C. 248. Now, contrary to its name, the statute also protects houses of worship from forceful obstruction. So prosecutors have to prove Don Lemon, or those he's charged with, physically blocked, threatened, or used force to disrupt congregates. It's not about opinions, it's about conduct. Keep in mind, during Joe Biden's presidency, a Christian prayer group was charged with violations of the FACE Act for doing this. If Lemon is actually alleged to have joined the group that stormed into the church, shouted slogans, blew whistles, and allegedly blocked congregates from exiting, that's exactly the sort of conduct these laws were written to prevent, probably less so than the Christian prayer warriors. Worshippers entering a place of worship do have rights.
The civil rights movement was about these very kinds of protests. There's nothing in the Constitution that tells you what time you can protest. You can protest at any time. That's the whole point of it, is to disrupt, it's to make uncomfortable. And that's what they're doing. And that's what I believe when I say everyone has to be willing to sacrifice something. You have to make people uncomfortable in these times.
Demanding justice for Renee Good and letting them know that this will not stand. They cannot pretend to be a house of God while harboring someone who is directing ICE agents to wreak havoc upon our community.
I have to take care of my flock.
Okay, but listen, we live there's a Constitution and the First Amendment to freedom of speech and freedom to assemble and protest.
I have to take care of my church and my family, so I asked if you actually would also leave this building.
People are showing up at houses where there are citizens without due process and breaking and entering the house. One that we saw, I've been watching from New York, with a battering ram.
On one side are people who watched a previous administration bring 12 million people in.
There is no secular excuse to barge in and make political noise that erases the rights of those to peacefully worship. Contrast that with Lemon's own defense that he was just reporting. There's no blanket constitutional provision that immunizes a reporter from ordinarily applicable laws simply because they're holding a microphone. The First Amendment doesn't say journalists get a free pass to become agitators anywhere, especially not in someone else's service on a Sunday morning. This is important. Merely recording doesn't wipe out conduct that crosses from observation into participation. Defense counsel will surely lean heavily on the First Amendment, but there's a twist. The statutes cited aren't targeting speech. They're targeting conduct that interferes with the rights of others. If a defense can't clearly separate Don Lemon's role from that of an activist, well, that could mean the First Amendment defense wouldn't apply. Finally, let's remember the bigger picture of law and order. If you're reporting from a protest that literally interrupts a service and your presence there is to broadcast and embolden the disruption, it's reasonable for prosecutors, especially under an administration that prioritizes protecting rights of worship, to scrutinize whether that reporting crossed the line into facilitating coordinated interference. Liberal outrage might focus on press freedom, but the law doesn't exist to shield anyone who dips a toe into conduct that harms other Americans. Joining us now, litigation expert and managing partner at M.R. Parker Law, attorney Michael R. Parker. So, Don Lemon has been indicted. Michael, would you rather be the defense attorney or the prosecutor trying this case, and why?
I mean, I think it depends on what facts you believe. So there are two charges that Don Lemon and Georgia Fort are being charged with currently. So the first one is conspiracy to interfere with First Amendment rights of others. And the second is a violation of the FACE Act, which originally was intended to protect abortion clinics, but the language in the statute also protects churches. So there's, conflicting reports of what happened here. So, Don Lemon is coming in and he's saying that, hey, look, I showed up. I was simply reporting. I was simply a member of the press. I wasn't contributing to the protest. I wasn't contributing to obstructing people's ability to leave or to congregate for prayer. But then there's the other side of the story. And Pam Bondi, for example, says there's video of him preventing a churchgoer from leaving. So, from what I understand, Don Lemon knew about this protest before it happened. He had been in communication with the organizers of the protest and then showed up and then reported on it. So if you take those facts and you believe those, I'd rather be the prosecutor. If you believe and the facts show that he was simply there to report, he didn't participate in the protests, then, the defense would be a stronger side. But from what I've seen of the evidence, from what I've seen in the reporting, it seems like the government's position is more likely to be true.
How does it change the culpability picture if Don Lemon knew that the organizers would use his attendance at the event and his celebrity to draw more protesters for more of an obstruction?
Well, I mean, then it goes to the level of, criminality, right? And there's this really great movie called Nightcrawler with Jake Gyllenhaal. And in this movie, he's a photographer for accidents and crimes. And at the end of the movie, at the climax, he essentially sets up a police sting of these criminals and people end up getting killed. He knew where the criminals would be. He waited for them to go to a populated area. And then he called the police so that they could show up and there'd be casualties. And even though all he did at the scene was report on it, he knew what was happening. He kind of organized it and he contributed to it. And that's the parallel to what, the allegations are against Don Lemon, right? He didn't just go there to report. He didn't just go there to see what was happening. He didn't find out about it in real time and then report on it. It seems like he had a constructive hand in what occurred. It seems like he knew what was going on. He was in communication with the protesters. So I do think it rises to the level of criminality. I think it's a completely different situation than what Don Lemon and his defense attorneys are trying to pitch. It wasn't a situation where it was freedom of the press. It wasn't a situation where he was simply exercising his First Amendment rights. It was a situation where, from what the government's evidence suggests, he helped coordinate something that gave him something to report on, and that's criminal.
Yeah, and I wonder if encouragement is going to be an analysis that a court does at some point. If Lemon didn't himself physically block someone from entering, and again, we'll have to see what that video shows, but if he was encouraging people to attend, telling them that they needed to attend, suggesting a course of action for them to take over this church service, if there's that type of evidence, and we still have to see, would that be the type of thing that would make it to a jury for their decision on a verdict?
Yeah, absolutely. There's nothing in the language of the statutes that requires physical force. Nothing requires Don Lemon to have physically restrained people from leaving or obstructed their ability to leave. For example, the conspiracy charge just requires him to conspire with another person for that to occur. He doesn't have to be the individual that physically blocked the churchgoers. He doesn't have to be the person who physically prevented them from worshiping, right? Same thing with the FACE Act, right? His participation and encouragement is enough. There's no requirement that he physically restrained anyone to be convicted of these crimes. And although a magistrate judge declined to issue a warrant, and although a second judge also declined, a grand jury heard the evidence. And a grand jury is essentially, a body of our peers, people who might be on a jury, and they believe that a crime was committed. They believed that it rose to the level of criminal conduct, and that's why it's going to go forward to, a prosecution and potentially a trial.
Don Lemon gets his day in court, as any American does when they're accused, and I think you've heard a lot of the arguments that will be litigated right here in this discussion. Michael R. Parker, managing partner at M.R. Parker Law, the guy I would hire if I was at a litigation event. Thanks so much for coming on the program, as always.
Thanks, Matt. You can always call me.